These are all the books that I want to read this fall. I am absolutely obsessed with anything fall related, Halloween, seasonal. I'm a very seasonal person, and so I was like, wow, it's pretty much fall now, so that means I need to read a bunch of really fun, cozy, fall-like books. And I was like, okay, wait, I'm gonna show you which books that I want to read this fall that kind of emulate that. Not all of them do, but like I would say like 99% of them do. So let's go through this. So one of the books that I want to read this fall is My Roommate is a Vampire. This is by Jenna Levine, and like everything about this, I'm like, yes, 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 and yes. Spooky vampires, oh yes. Fun rom-com, yes. Spicy, yes. The only thing I don't like is that this cover is like one of those really gross scratchy covers, so touching it is just like really gross. So I feel like I have to like hold it like this. I'm gonna hold it like this. And what's fun about this is that it's literally just the plot. She like moves in with this guy who she's like very interested in. It's like he talks like he's from like the olden days. He has bags of blood. He sleeps all day, he's out all night, but he leaves her like really cute notes and stuff, and they fall for each other, and he's a vampire. So I think that that just sounds really adorable and hilarious and just perfect for the season. So the next book that I want to read, and this is in no order, this is just like fall as a season is like when I want to read these books, but the next one in this random list is Happily Haunted After by Brittany Kelly. And this one, I saw it and was like, okay, I need to get this because it's basically a second chance romance. And this woman is like, she's tired of her job. She wants to kind of like fulfill her dream of like owning a hotel. And so she reaches out to her ex-best friend who's an investor, and they kind of start working together, but the hotel's haunted. And they're trying not to fall in love with each other because she's worried that if they do, he won't invest in the hotel, and like the hotel is like haunted and stuff. And I'm like, haunted hotel? I've never read a haunted hotel romance kind of story. And I'm like, this sounds really fun and super fall. So yeah, this is gonna be pretty cool. Now, when we get deeper into the October months, I was like, I want to read something a little darker. And so this is the first dark romance book that I've ever bought, and honestly I'm a little intimidated by it. This is Haunted Adeline by H.D. Carleton, and people either really love this book or are really just like disgusted by this book. And I really loved the Netflix show You, which is like the stalker that makes people fall in love with him that he's obsessed with, and this kind of gives that vibes but is somehow worse than Joel Goldberg. So that's kind of what I get from this book. It's like this, I'm pretty sure the guy in here is a stalker, and he's obsessed with this girl, and I think he actually does hurt her at points as well. And then she like falls for him, and I'm like, this sounds twisted, but I'm like kind of interested. So yeah, this is a dark romance. I've heard so many things about this book, and I'm like, okay, Halloween's the perfect time to read this. So this would probably be deeper in October when I read this, but yeah, we'll see if this is a vibe or not, but it's a pretty big one too, so I'm like, ew. So next up we have The Last Witch of Scotland by Philip Paris. And what's cool about this one is it's actually based loosely on a true story, and that's the true story of the last woman who was executed for witchcraft in Britain. And so that kind of aspect and stuff is pulled into this story, but it's also a story of like romance and sacrifice and family and friendships and like all of that. So I was like, this sounds really interesting, especially when it has like that historical tie to it. I absolutely love stories that have stuff like that. In a way, it kind of reminds me of Alice Hoffman's Practical Magic book, which I think will be a similar vibe, where it's like a much deeper, more complex story than what you were expecting. And yeah, I don't know if there'll be actual magic in this book or if it's going to be more like reality, but either way, I think that it sounds super interesting. Ex Hex by Erin Sterling. I have literally been waiting all year to read this book. I've been wanting to read it, but I'm like, no, this is a fall book. I can only read this book in fall. And so now it's finally time. So that's super exciting. And so this book here, it kind of has the same cover style as The Very Irregular Society of Witches, I believe was the name of that book that I read last year. I loved that book so much. It was very good. And this one is basically like a romantic comedy, and our main character puts a curse on her ex because, you know, she's super upset. She drank a little bit too much. She curses him, but she doesn't think anything actually happened until many, many years later when they cross paths again and the magic of the town is all like messed up and she's like, oh no. And so they have to like work together to break the curse that she did. And it just sounds really fun. And I think that it's like a second chance romance. It actually has magic. So I know for sure this one will have magic in it, which is fun. And I've been waiting a long time to read this book. So yeah, this is very exciting that it's finally that time of the year. Next up, we have The Lost Bookshop by Evie Woods. And I saw this cover and was like, I need this. As somebody who obviously loves books about books make me love books, and it's just like, it's so good. It's like when I read the Book of Doors and I was like, oh, it's about books and like time travel. But yeah, this one's cool, and it also kind of reminds me of It's a Wonderful Life, and I'm gonna tell you why. It basically follows along 3 characters, I believe, and they really don't think that they've really made an impact in the world. They feel like they're just kind of like side characters in their own story. And so in this bookstore that they go, I believe that they get transported, or they read the way that they've impacted people in the books in the bookshop. And I love that kind of story. And I've mentioned it 100 times if you've been following me for a while, but It's a Wonderful Life is one of my favorite movies of all time. And so when it's a book similar to that, where it's like, maybe you feel like you haven't made a difference, but you touch so many people's souls as you just live your life, going about your day to day, that you make a bigger impact than you think. And this book sounds like that's the vibe of it. And I was just like, yes! Now, okay, this isn't really like a fall read, but I want to read it in the fall time. And that's Warbreaker by Sanderson. This is a really exciting read because a lot of subscribers have told me that now that I've read the Stormlight Archive and the original Mistborn trilogy, that this is a really good book to read next, and it just kind of adds into the Cosmere journey that I'm in. I honestly can't tell you much about it. Whenever I try to explain Sanderson books, they're just like so complex, but I am gonna try. I believe that it's like a bunch of gods, and there's some like kins and stuff, and there's like this person with a sword. Honestly, that's as much as I'm gonna go. I know that the sword is in Stormlight and Xhex has it, and that's where we're gonna go with this. So this is kind of one of those books that I don't really know too much about, but because I trust the recommendations and I've read the other stories that within like that universe, I'm like, okay, let's read this. I really want to read it. I also want to read Half a Soul by Oliva Atwater. This is a book that has a really gross touched like cover as well. So we're gonna hold it like this, like we did with that other book that had a gross cover. And so this one is interesting because it's basically like fae and kind of like an olden days kind of era, kind of like Bridgerton era-esque is how I get it. And what's different about the main character is that like she only has half of her soul, and so that means that she doesn't really feel things and behave the certain way that like everybody else with a full soul does. And she may not even be capable of falling in love. And so she just being like a regular person is like, well, like I want to fall in love. Like that's kind of what everybody's doing around me as well. And then she somehow gets involved with like the fae world and all of this. So it sounds really cool and definitely up my alley. And I think it's a series too, which is pretty cool. We also have Hollowed by Jessica S. Taylor. And this one is basically a Sleepy Hollow reimagined story. And I'm like, ooh, I really like Sleepy Hollow. So seeing that there's like a book based on that, I'm like, okay, what's this about? And I'm gonna tell you what it's about. Every single year, there has to be a sacrifice to the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow. And so the main character is that sacrifice in the story. But unlike the other sacrifices, she's not just gonna let herself get sacrificed, even if that means the town is gonna be in danger, because they have to basically sacrifice people for the magic around the town to protect them. And so she's like, no, and she like tries to run away from it, and she comes face to face with like the Headless Horseman. And what happens, I guess, is that he doesn't actually want the sacrifices. He ends up working with her, and they try to figure out like what is going on in Sleepy Hollow, like how can we help the townspeople? What is this magic? Like, why do we have to do these sacrifices? And I don't know if they like fall in love or not, but that would be a bonus for me because romance. And last but not least, we have A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Lane. And this one is my book of the month pick. So that's why I was like, oh yeah, like I definitely have to read it in like the fall time months. I try to read them within the fall time months. Sometimes it doesn't happen though because there's other books that I read. But this one's cool because it's based on like ancient China, and the main character is like very, very beautiful. And what's different is that everybody just expects her to get married and like have a family. But her story takes a different kind of turn when she ends up getting involved with like the military, and she's kind of like hired as a spy because no one's gonna like suspect this like beautiful woman to be a spy or even like a trained killer. And so I think that's pretty much like the plot. Like she ends up like infiltrating into this like area, trying to gather all the information for the military. And maybe she ends up finding out that these people are not what they always expect other people to be like. I'm not entirely sure, but stories that are like weaved within history are always some of my favorite stories. Like the Last Witch of Scotland that we also just talked about in this video has that historical tie. And I just think that that's so much fun. And I learn history at the same time while I'm reading a cool story. And it's just like a win-win, especially for someone who's not like super familiar with history that's not just like Canadian history. So I'm definitely very open-minded, and I love learning about other cultures and history and all that good stuff. So yeah, this is pretty cool sounded to me. So yeah, these are the books that I definitely plan on reading this fall, which is going to be very fun. I'm sure there'll be other books I read like during the fall time as well, but these ones are like very fall, Halloween-y, cozy vibe focused. So I really want to dedicate the time to really make sure that I read these books because I'm all about seasonal vibes. So if you're interested in watching me read any of those books, or if you like watching people read those kinds of books, or you like book recommendations and stuff, I will be making a video about every single one of those books as I read them. So if you're interested in that, definitely hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and turn on the bell notification. That way you get notified anytime a new video comes out. If you're a big fall fan like I am, definitely hit the like button, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!